Thank you all for coming. This project, the innovation project, has involved a lot of resources on our part, and I'm really happy to see that everyone came to attend today and came to see what the results were and how we can move this process forward. So I'm really happy to see you all here today, and I was happy right off the bat as soon as the registration started coming in, because it gave meaning to the effort that we put into this. I titled my presentation a study of the approach to innovation process in several small, medium, and large companies in Ontario. And that's because the numbers that we have used for our surveys are not very large. We sent the request to assist us to 92 companies. Out of these 92 companies, we were expecting a response from 45 companies, 15 large, 15 medium, and 15 small. Of the 92 companies, every single one of them has previously heard of us, heard of the IFPT, so we wanted to go to companies that we had a relationship with. Our rate of response was a little bit lower than expected. We received a positive response and the survey completed from 36 people, 36 respondents in all, out of which 27 were food processing manufacturers, and then 9 of them were service providers. So we were a little bit off the mark. In terms of the distribution, 12 of the 15 targeted large companies responded positively. 6 of the medium companies responded positively, and 9 of the small companies. And I presented here the criteria that we used, which is above 50 million in revenue for last year for large companies, between 10 and 50 million revenue for medium companies, and below 10 million revenue. And the number of people employed was not part of the criteria that we used. We just used the revenue, just to make it simpler and to make it easier and less information to disclose for the companies that we polled. We received some positive responses, and they were very heartwarming. The positive responses were, I would be happy to help. I would be happy to assist in this process. Some of them within half a day said, this person in our company is the right person, is the one that's going to fill your questionnaire, and I'm copying him right now. So please, Steve, help Mihaela with that. We also had responses like, thank you. We really are glad to be included in this process. We want to be part of this. And here's the survey. I already completed it. I had some time today, and I already completed it. Also, see survey attached. I'm looking forward to the follow-up. These are some of the positive responses, and I believe that the manufacturers that responded like this need to be given credit. Of course, for confidentiality reasons, and I promised everyone that participated in the process that the names of the companies and the names of the people will be kept out of the final report. But I wanted to give credit to these responses because they were very heartwarming. They showed a true commitment to the innovation concept. We had some not so positive responses as well, and I wanted to share some of those with you as well, because in some situations they were funny. They weren't very comfortable with sharing information. And if some of you in the room remember, if you remember the content of the survey, most of the information is publicly available. Most of the information is easy to get to, but some people didn't feel comfortable sharing that information, so that was okay. There were companies that did not perceive themselves as innovative, so they didn't provide any answers because of that. No, we're just doing our job. We're not innovative at all, not here, not in the head office is innovative. We're not innovative. So that was another type of answer. So, or for confidentiality reason, I will decline to answer your question. This was one of those days when I closed the door to the office and I showed it to my colleagues. The contact I had with this company wasn't there anymore, and the manager that answered was quite quite strong in her answer. She said she's not here, she no longer works for us, and who do you think has the time to answer your question? And I know, I worked in the industry for 18 years. I know people put out fires all the time, but if we just take a little bit of time and are courteous with each other, I think we can get a lot more done. So, also, to go into the results, one of the first elements that we tried to establish was how do food processors and service providers regard innovation. And the way people regard innovation, we try to guide that response into a step, a cycle, or other. And about half of the respondents look at innovation as a cycle, and the other half, a little bit over a half, look at innovation as either a step or something else, a state of things, or an approach, or a part of their operation, but not necessarily a step or a cycle. What are the main drivers for innovation in the small segment that we were able to poll and that we were able to survey? By far, the first is competitiveness and profit. A second trend, and when I'm talking about trend, again, we have to remember that it's 27 manufacturers that we surveyed. But the trends were quite consistent. The second one was the customer expectation. So a customer would come to a food processor with a certain request or a certain demand or just a hint. The competition is doing this. How about you? How are you going to meet that? So that was another important but consistent trend that we noticed. In the small segment of manufacturers that we received responses from, efficiency is a significant driver, mostly in large and medium companies. It almost seems like small companies tend to focus on firefighting, focus on dealing with the operational and cash flow of the business so much that they have no time to focus on the low-hanging fruit, which innovative processes, efficiency improvement processes can bring. On the other hand, small companies have a stronger, much stronger orientation or driver from the social challenges. So they seem to be closer to the community they serve, so they are more attuned to their customer needs. And that's part of the elements that drive their innovation process. The large companies, on the other hand, are mandated nowadays for corporate responsibility, and that includes some social challenges that do drive innovation. And by that I mean, manufacturing a green way, or reducing salt, or reducing fat, or being concerned for the health of the public. So these are just, as I said, from a small segment of manufacturers and service providers that we were able to receive responses from. These are some very consistent trends. Again, in terms of self-perception, a lot of the companies, some of the companies, don't perceive themselves as innovative. And it almost looks like the more advanced the structures they have inside an R&D department or a research department, the more they perceive themselves as innovative. So it almost seems like the structure that exists in a company drives the self-perception, the self-image of the company. Another element that we looked at were resources, and it seems the results show that the 27 companies that we surveyed show that the strategic allocation of resources happens mostly in large companies. So for that reason alone, it almost looks like large companies that have the budget, have the human resources, have the people that are dedicated to research and development, hence to innovation, perceive themselves as being at the forefront of innovative process, innovative food processing technology. What was surprising, though, was that innovation was not part of the pillars that make the mission statement of the companies. There was no innovative core or core value at the mission of any of the companies that we polled. But we did notice in some medium companies a tendency to include innovation in the day-to-day activity or to weave it in the culture of the company. One of them said innovation is implied in the job. Innovation is part of the day-to-day business culture of the company. We set the beginning and the end for the people that we charge with that, but then they have complete freedom. So if they need to ask for stuff, we're going to give it to them. Also, many companies of the ones, or some of the companies, the ones that have a less formal approach to innovation, again, they have it weaved in their day-to-day business. And it's mostly in these companies that we see the link between innovation and improvement, not so much between innovation and invention. In terms of barriers, we discussed what stops the innovation process, what hinders it, what makes it more different. And almost unanimously, among the 27 respondents, regulations were noted as a barrier. However, some companies, the very few that said, no, regulations are not a barrier, are companies that develop two regulations. So they take the regulation as the starting point and say, what can I do? What are the things that I am allowed to put in this product? I understand in the States I can put more in it, but what can I put in it in Canada? So they developed two regulations, so few of them mentioned, no, regulations are not a barrier. We don't find it a barrier. Availability of innovation dollars was identified as a second trend among the respondents. If we only had more money, then we would be able to do more. Many people echoed that response in the surveys that I conducted. Both internal and external resources seem to be scarce in the surveys that we conducted. In some cases, progressive companies have the approach of, we don't budget for it, but if it's needed, we're going to allocate the resources. So there are buffers somewhere, but people don't know where those buffers are. But if we need it, we're going to get those funds. The question about collaboration, are you open to collaboration? Yes, of course, absolutely. That was the response of 15 out of 27 companies polled, which was quite encouraging. There were, of course, the no's. No, we're not open. No, we don't want to collaborate. We don't need to collaborate, not for innovation. 6 of them. And 6 of them said yes, but. And these are some of the but examples that I can give you. It depends on the competitive position. Working with external collaborators that do not compete with us on the market. They have to have the same culture as us. And I thought that was a really good position. One of the manufacturers said, only with companies that don't pose a threat, another manufacturer said. Depends on what kind of collaboration, and let's leave it at that. The results in terms of intellectual property, that was the hottest potato on the survey. If possible, everybody avoided to respond to that question. So usually I followed up with the interview because people who know me know I don't give up. So what about intellectual property? And it almost feels like this picture here. It's very difficult to deal with that. Most times we deal with it with non-disclosure agreement. We go to intellectual property only when there is no other choice. So some people do use that, do use legal resources to deal with intellectual properties. Yes?
What would be the reason that the food processing industry doesn't use patents to protect intellectual property?
We did ask ourselves that question, and I think the way we looked at possible answers, and we did ask the manufacturers those questions, and part of the answers were related to how difficult the process is, or how difficult the process is perceived to be in patenting a certain process idea or product idea or packaging idea. But another reason seems to be the fact that information flows so fast that by the time you're ready to patent, 5 others have come up with the same solution, and it's no longer worth it because of the short life that something new has when it comes to food. So that's kind of how we explained it. In summary, what I could say after the qualitative study of the 27 responders from the food manufacturing industry in Ontario was that innovation seems to be successful when it's weaved into the culture of a company. When the company itself perceives the mandate that they have as an innovative mandate, and when they look at innovation from both the improvement portion and the new or invention portion. So that's in summary my presentation. This is kind of the total result of the survey process that we conducted. And for everyone in the room here that participated in the survey, I just want to say personally thank you for helping us with that. Yes?
You talked about barriers and the use of term regulation. I'm becoming extremely frustrated. People just seem to throw that word out. They just say regulation. Were they being specific of what those regulatory barriers were, or are they just using the term regulation?
Okay, so the term regulation was put in there by us. We did want to see how people feel about the regulatory environment that the food processing industry operates in Canada, which is quite strict compared with other countries, and it's a lot stricter than the United States. Many of them were very specific about what they find is difficult with regulation and prevents innovation, especially when it comes to product development. There is the amount and type of additives that you can put in a product. That's very intensely regulated in Canada, while in the States and in other places, you can put those ingredients in a product. There's also the managed supply level of regulation, the one that deals with a quota of chicken, a quota of milk, that restricts a little bit, in some cases, the flow of cash or the flow of product that a company might have. So to be specific, these are the major elements that were mentioned in our question. What about regulation do you find as barriers? Okay? Yes?
Sorry, from your research, what was new that came out of that? Like, was there a eureka? Was there a key learning that you didn't know before, as opposed to reiteration of what we already know? Like, what was new information that is really actionable from a processor's standpoint?
I think that what I found as new from all this was the nuances of why certain things are perceived as barriers, and also the nuances of collaboration. For me, that was something that was very important. The attitude that innovative companies have towards collaboration versus the attitude that companies that are not that innovative but perceive themselves as innovative or think they are innovative, they have around collaboration. So, well, no, we're not really collaborative. We're not. That was one of my eureka moments, the approach to collaboration. Anyone else? Yes? Yes?
Thanks for the information. That was really interesting. I wondered about the breakout. I don't recall the survey details exactly, but you talked about the larger companies having dedicated HR resources. Did you get a sense of the resources in companies relative to their size, where maybe more smaller or mid-sized companies didn't have named staff in R&D or technical directors or whatever? Is that what you would take from that survey, or did you not have enough?
Yes, that information was provided. It was requested specifically, and it was provided, and almost consistently large companies with strong financial resources and strong people resources would have dedicated research and development departments, so the HR element was very clear, while companies that are medium or small would have people wearing many hats. Invariably, invariably, it's very difficult to imagine a research and development scientist that's all it does in a company of 20 people and under $10 million in revenue. But it didn't seem to be a barrier to innovation. It didn't seem to be a barrier to the perception of what new or better is. So that was heartwarming at the time. Okay? Thank you very much.